Welcome everyone today to our discussion on weight training versus cardio. We're going to talk about all the differences between cardio, weight training, what the benefits are, which one is the best for you and your specific goals, and even go over a common few myths about both cardio, weight training, and maybe just some exercises in general. So thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast. Please, at any point in the video, if you do have a question, go ahead and drop it in the comments down below. Also, if you aren't already subscribed to our channel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We make videos helping individuals of all abilities navigate the gym, health, and fitness industry. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our discussion of today, being cardio versus weight training, which is going to be the best for you. All right, so to begin this discussion, we're actually going to talk about cardio in general and what is cardio and why does it really matter, right? So cardiovascular exercise is simply, when we break down the word cardio literally means heart, and vascular, I want you to think about that like your veins and your capillaries and the arteries in your body. So when we combine all these together, we have our cardiovascular system. And this system is super crucial and important for not only improving our overall fitness and potentially helping us lose some weight, but just keeping us alive, right? If our cardiovascular system isn't up and running and isn't working to its fullest capability, then that's it. That's why a lot of times when people, they have heart attacks or they have some heart palpitations, maybe they have a genital defect, they have huge issues in their overall quality of life. Ultimately, sometimes to the point where they die very young, very early, or just potentially earlier than they would if they didn't have cardiovascular issues. In addition to your heart, veins, and capillaries, your lungs are also a part of this as well. And it may seem kind of weird when you're thinking about like, oh, cardio, like I'm working my heart. How would my lungs have anything to do with this? Well, the lungs are actually super crucial in what they bring into the body. If we think about the nutrients that we need to stay alive, one of the big ones is oxygen. And oxygen actually comes in through our mouth, of course, goes into our body, and then our lungs, there's certain capillaries and different types of, we just mentioned vasculature that actually exists in the lungs, which take it in, absorb it, and then the oxygen, once it's through the lungs, will then go into the bloodstream. Once it's in the bloodstream, the oxygen that we just inhaled can then go to the tissues. Then at the tissues, they'll of course use the oxygen. Once the oxygen is used, carbon dioxide is a byproduct, but it can't just stay in there, otherwise you would die. So it needs to come back into your cells, back out through the lungs, and then once it's in the lungs, that's when you exhale it. So that's kind of the whole general overarching cardiovascular system in a nutshell. When we're talking about actually having a good cardiovascular system, it's basically how well can we take in oxygen, shuttle it to all those cells in our body, use it for the given tasks, let's say running, for example, since we're talking about cardiovascular exercise, and then take the waste out and repeat this numerous times for as long as we need to do the physical activity. So if you have a good cardiovascular system, you're going to be able to do all those processes very well. Not so much, as we just mentioned, maybe you have a heart defect, maybe your cardio isn't as good, you won't be able to do this as well, which makes not only exercise exponentially more challenging, but all those other aspects of daily life are incredibly more difficult as well. So why does it matter? Well, of course it matters because, as we just mentioned, if you can't do this well, your life, it's going to be hard to go up a flight of stairs. You're going to struggle bringing in groceries. If you have kids or even grandkids, or don't have kids, but you want to someday, right? All of these things are going to be much more difficult because your body can't keep up with it. Specifically, your cardiovascular system can't keep up with what your body wants to do. So this is why trying to improve our cardio is so important. Also too, and we'll kind of talk about a few more of the benefits a little bit later in the podcast, but just generally speaking, good cardiovascular fitness lowers the chances of different comorbidities, and we'll talk about what that is in a second. Improved quality of life. You're just going to be able to enjoy doing all those different things you want much more. And we're also going to talk about a few other potential benefits from doing cardio a little bit later in the podcast as well. But what is cardio? Why does it matter? It's basically your body's ability to, of course, take in all the nutrients that we breathe in, shuttle it to the different cells and different organs and processes that need that oxygen, take the waste from it, and then just shuttle it back out into the world, etc., etc. So super important to have good cardio. And of course, this next session will kind of dive in a little bit more on the different types of cardio. Now that we've gotten a baseline of kind of what cardio is and why it's important and what it can do for you in a nutshell, we're going to go over a few different types of cardio, talk about heart rate zones, and also potentially which is the best form of cardio for yourself. So I wanted to start this off with a question of what makes something cardio? Like, what makes, let's see, I have this USB drive here. What makes it not cardio that I'm just picking this up and holding it, right? What makes an activity cardio? And typically when we talk about cardio, it's something that's low fatigue, but also will get your heart rate up. So it's something that also needs to be very repeatable, usually something for at least 10 plus minutes. With that said, though, there are other forms of cardiovascular exercise that won't be quite as long, but when we usually think of a typical cardio, it's going to be low fatiguing, and when I say low fatiguing, this might be confusing. You're thinking like, okay, just going to bed, going to sleep, that's low fatiguing, that's cardio. No. It's a low fatiguing, repeatable activity. So something like very light jogging or brisk walking for most people. That's extremely low fatiguing. Maybe it doesn't seem like it at the time, but comparatively to if you went out for a run is extremely fatiguing on your body and cardiovascular system. So that's kind of a brief nutshell of what I think would make something cardio. And bleeding into that, we can also then go into the varying levels of cardio. So believe it or not, just like when you go to the gym and you have your heaviest set, you're doing like a 1 rep max of a lift or just something you can only do for one time. It's also kind of the same thing for cardio. There's different zones that you can actually work in when it comes to cardio. So usually we start with zone 1. That's just very light cardio, so that'd be about 50 to 60% of your heart rate max. And I'll actually talk a little bit about heart rate max in a second. Zone 2, a little bit lighter, 60 to 70%. And then it keeps going up and up all the way up until zone 5 cardio is 90 to 100%. So this is really easy to remember. Just zone 1 cardio is 50 to 60% of your heart rate max. Zone 5 is 90 to 100%, so it just jumps 10% for every single zone. And there are unique benefits to each one of these zones if you actually train with them. I just mentioned heart rate max, kind of what that is. So let's talk about heart rate max. Heart rate max is, of course, how hard your heart can beat when it's literally at its capacity. It's doing everything it can. And what does that really mean? Or how do we get to that? So usually, kind of the good rule of thumb is to do 220 minus your age. This gives you a good general ballpark, but I will say with this, there's a huge asterisk caveat that this is not necessarily 100% correct. There are some people who are just genetic anomalies. They have a really high max heart rate. There's some people who have a really low max heart rate. It's going to very distinctly be different based off of individuals. So this is a good rule of thumb. Kind of a gold standard to actually find your max heart rate would be to do a VO2 max test, which is extremely painful and difficult. So not a lot of people want to do that. You'll like hook up to a heart rate monitor, you'll have all these things going on. But I understand that's not particularly the most pleasant thing to do and what most people would even want to do, right? So for the most part, start with 220 minus your age when looking at these different levels that you can work within, and just kind of work it a bit. You might notice that, oh, I'm doing my quote unquote maximum heart rate. I might be doing my zone 5 training, which is 90 to 100% of your maximum heart rate, and you don't even feel tired. Okay, if that's the case, maybe your maximum heart rate is a little bit higher. So kind of something to play with a little bit. Let's talk about kind of some of the different benefits of working at those different types of levels. So 50 to 60%, this is very light. You're going to get a little bit of cardiovascular benefit, but this is going to be kind of more in your general movement category, so just general physical activity. Once you start getting into the zone 2 to zone 3, that's a 60 to 80% category. You're going to start to build some cardiovascular stamina, some local muscular endurance as well. And then once you go into those kind of harder levels, we might even be talking about our anaerobic capacity, which we'll talk about in a second, which is the ability to do a exercise basically as hard as you can without oxygen for a little bit. So that's what anaerobic means. Aerobic means with oxygen, anaerobic means without oxygen. When you're reaching your quote unquote maximum heart rate zones, you're going to be getting to a point where you've reached what's called anaerobic threshold or anaerobic capacity, where your body can't cycle through all those nutrients, can't cycle through, let's say we needed to take an oxygen, get out CO2. Your body and the tissues aren't able to keep up well enough to be able to continue that maximum zone 5 output. So essentially where I'm getting at with all of this is that is more of an anaerobic activity. So it's still going to improve your heart health, but it's in a more maximal level, which is a key thing I want to note here. There are benefits from all of these. So you should be doing some lighter stuff to help with joint integrity, joint health. You should be doing some middle of the road stuff to build your endurance capacity a little bit. And then you should also be challenging your heart rate and getting really up to that kind of anaerobic threshold or anaerobic capacity level, because that's how you build a well-rounded heart. Just like you build a well-rounded body, which we'll talk about in resistance training in a second, you're kind of trying to do the same thing with your heart as well. Let's go over some different types of cardio. And so we just talked about intensities, but we can also talk about different types too. I kind of segmented these into higher impact categories and lower impact. So if you're somebody who is younger or somebody who's done a lot of high impact activity, as we'll discuss in a second, over your life, these may be pretty easy for you to actually kind of adhere to and keep working with. But if you're somebody who's a little bit older, or you have joint pain, or you're just not comfortable doing super high impact stuff, we have some lower impact options as well. We mentioned what actually kind of defines cardio, of what makes something cardio. These will all be definitions of that. So let's begin. Higher impact options, I have running, jumping rope, fast walking. I would even sort of say sprinting, but that's more the anaerobic capacity. So we're thinking about, again, these are cyclical things that are repeatable, for the most part low fatigue. If you're in general decent shape, you can go out for a run and it's not going to totally wreck you for 10 plus minutes. If you're really out of shape, probably will, but that's kind of at your own relative level. But the difference is these are really high impact, which means we have a lot of landing force, a lot of eccentric load. That means the muscle is lengthening. So when you hit something and it's absorbing it, that's kind of that eccentric. When it comes to fast walking and running, large eccentric load, that's what make it high impact. We also have lower impact forms of cardio, being swimming, walking, biking, rowing. I added circuit training in here. That could be doing some light dumbbell or kettlebell movements, maybe some body weight movements, but doing multiple repetitions. going to another one and kind of working that in. It's almost like cardio plus weights. I really like doing that. In addition to that, we have the stair stepper, elliptical, spin bicycles. Those are all lower impact activities because they don't involve absorbing loads. And depending on who you are, again, you might want to do something more higher impact, especially if you just want to challenge yourself, you'd like it better, that could be you. But also, if you are somebody who's trying to improve your bone mineral density, that's a huge key to have higher impact stuff. With that said, all of these are good. Do what you really, really want to enjoy, and we'll kind of talk about some best practices in a second. But I wanted to finish with kind of this last little section on the different types. Again, we're going to talk about intensities, but this is more along the lines of where are we actually getting our energy from versus just your heart rate max. So when we're talking about steady state cardio, this is kind of that zone 1, 2, maybe into zone 3 training. So roughly 50 to it'd be 70-ish percent, 70, maybe 80%. I'd say more towards 70% of your heart rate max. Heart rate max, again, 220 minus your age. Steady state cardio, so in that 50 to 70% range, is going to be what we're calling the oxidative pathway. Oxidative phosphorylation is the exact term, but basically this is, as we talked about, your body's ability to take oxygen from the outside, send it to the cell, send it to the tissues it needs, and then take out all of the waste product and then recycle that. So if you're in a steady state where basically the byproducts aren't building up too quickly, you're able to use this oxidative pathway to keep going. It's just something to kind of note when we're talking about working these different aspects of fitness. So that's kind of the steady state oxidative pathway. Also, in about a 60 to 90 second of hard work range, this is more of your glycolytic pathway. So it's when your body's tapping into the stored muscle glycogen directly in the muscle cells. And glycogen, if you're unaware, is essentially stored carbohydrate. So carbohydrate, when breaking down, gets stored as glycogen into our muscle cells, our liver, and a few different places. But you're actually taking some of the glycogen in your muscle, liver, etc., and using that to fuel that exercise. With that said, this is great because you can perform at a higher intensity, but it doesn't last nearly as long. Your glycogen, especially when using this glycolytic pathway, will actually decrease pretty quickly. Again, roughly 60 to 90 seconds if you're doing a hard work bout. That means you know you're at about that range. Max effort, this is where we would be doing kind of in that anaerobic threshold we talked about earlier. So phosphogenic, this is basically sprinting, and phosphogenic and max effort stuff, I want you to think about going hand in hand with your anaerobic ability. Again, so without oxygen. Phosphagen is an extremely quick fuel source. You can tap into it almost immediately to get going, boom, and you can use it fast. But it dies out quick, sometimes 10 to 15 seconds. So your body cannot use it very long. When we're thinking about ATP, the phosphogenic system uses a good amount of this right away, but it does not last. So that's kind of just generally cardio, different levels, different types of cardio, and which of them is best for you. Any of them work. I'd highly recommend all of them. Try to incorporate some steady state, some 60 to 90 second harder workouts, and also some max effort stuff where you literally are going so fast that you can only last about 10 seconds and then you have to relax. All of those are good and will give you a good, well-rounded base for your heart health. Something I want to say too when it comes to fat loss, some do burn more calories, especially full body ones. So something like rowing burns a lot of calories, running burns a lot of calories because there's a large eccentric load and you can move a little bit quicker. Also too, if you are not proficient at an exercise, say you are worse at running or worse at swimming, you're going to burn more calories during that activity because you essentially are not used to the movement. if you're not as proficient or good at the movement, it's going to take more energy to do the same movement versus somebody who's just gliding. You know, that person you envy who can just run a mile without ease. Their proficiency is a little bit better, so they're likely going to be able to run better. Also, too, what is comfortable for you? If you like lower impact stuff, maybe stick towards that more. What are your goals? Of course, if you just want general well-rounded health, doing all of these and any of these forms of cardio are going to be great. Find ones you enjoy, combine your intensities. But yeah, I think goals are the most important thing. You know, obviously, if you want to get better at running because you have a 5K coming up, of course, you're going to need to do some running. Okay, so this next section is going to be along the lines of, do you really need to do cardio? As you'll see shortly, yes, 100%, you should do cardiovascular exercise in your daily life. But we're going to talk about how it can change your brain, body, and ultimately a few other aspects of your life. So we'll first begin on brain. Cardiovascular exercise is actually referenced quite a bit in the literature on how it can improve brain health. This is still getting sort of sussed out, so we don't know for sure, but cardiovascular exercise can improve your overall mood. It can help with better memory. There's a lot of studies going on reducing the chances of developing Alzheimer's and dementia, specifically through cardiovascular activity. It helps you with thinking clearly, so kind of knocking off those cobwebs or helping with brain fog, and also challenging yourself mentally. And this isn't something that goes talked about a lot, but I think there's something to be said about if you are performing cardio and you're going out for a really long run or you're going out for a long bike ride, and it really takes a lot of mental fortitude to be able to consistently do that. And when you're challenging yourself, not only physically but mentally, that's a great way to keep your brain healthy, keep those neurons firing, and help keep them basically realizing that there's a reason for you to need those brain cells. In addition to this, of course, bodily health beyond your brain and your mind. I also forgot to mention too, the overall brain health. We talked about, it's still kind of getting sussed out on what the mechanisms are behind this, but we know improving blood flow to any part of your body helps to deliver nutrients. So we think, especially cardio, there's a lot of blood flow going through your entire body. We think that might be kind of the main reasons why it helps with memory, cognition, all those things. Moving into bodily health, burning more calories in the immediate. So it can help with weight loss, as in body composition. I will say shortly though, when we talk about weight training, that although it does burn calories right now, after that session, you're not burning any extra calories, right? So when you do 300, let's say you go out for a run and you burn 300 calories, you're only burning 300 calories when you're doing the movement. So it can assist in weight loss to some degree to help dig into that calorie expenditure, but it isn't the be all. And we'll talk about weight training and how that might actually be a better tool for exercise a little bit later in the weight loss later in the podcast. You get a stronger heart. So what happens when you improve your cardio is your stroke volume improves. And basically what this means is that your heart is stronger, so it doesn't have to work as hard. So instead of, let's say there's somebody who's unhealthy and it takes them 80 beats of their heart to get the same amount of blood out to the body that it takes you to get 60 beats out through your heart. This is because the heart's stronger and can eject more blood into the ventricles, into the different atriums throughout the rest of the body. And this is really important because if you think about any type of muscle, it's good to be working it. But if it's chronically overworked, as in it's too stressed out too much of the time, it's going to lead to issues long term, not just with the heart itself, but also the connective tissue. That's kind of where we see sometimes this atherosclerotic plaque buildup, high blood pressure, all these things. Having a stronger heart can make that easier for yourself. This is why also too, when people are very fit, they have a low resting heart rate. It's because they don't need to force as much blood out of their body when they're just sitting and doing nothing at rest. In addition to this, reduces the chances of osteoporosis if you are doing kind of more higher impact activity. We'll talk about resistance training for osteoporosis as well, but if you're doing running, fast walking, any type of thing putting a lot of load on your body very quickly, that's going to help with your bone health. In addition to this, improving circulation throughout your entire body. This can help with recovery from your other workouts or just daily life, and also help to reduce some pain if you're getting blood and nutrients into areas and kind of clearing out a lot of that waste, which might lead to pain. That's going to help overall with your body. Making activities of daily life easier for yourself. You're going to be able to go to the grocery store easier. You're going to be able to play with your family easier. All these things are super important. Also, blood sugar management. If you think about it, we talked about early in the podcast. So glycogen in itself is stored carbohydrate. So if your body is able to use more free floating blood sugar, as in you just ate something and you can use something right in your bloodstream to immediately help and get it to your activity, that's going to play a huge role on your blood sugar. So if you're somebody who's a type 2 diabetic, if you think about it, your pancreas is not secreting insulin well enough. So because of this, you can't manage blood sugar very well. Your body can't eject insulin, so which actually helps to decrease your overall blood sugar. So if you introduce exercise, cardiovascular exercise, it can kind of help with this blood sugar management as well. It can lower plaque buildup in the arteries. HDL is kind of our good plaque, we call. LDL is our bad plaque. LDL will build up over time if your heart does not work properly, if it doesn't take a lot of the cholesterol that we take in from our diet and bring it to the tissues, as in using it out for all the different things it needs to do and just keeps it near the heart. That, of course, can lead to that coronary heart disease, maybe even heart attacks, high blood pressure, all these different things. So HDL is good, LDL is bad. Another way I like to remember this is LDL is lousy, so L lousy. Also, cardio can help with giving you stronger connective tissue. So if we think about that higher impact physical activity we did earlier, this is super important because if you're challenging your muscles, challenging your bones and tendons and all these things, that's of course going to, as you recover, build up over time to improve your connective tissue. Decreases stroke and cardiac arrest risk. So we mentioned this earlier. That's just keeping your overall peripheral arteries and veins and capillaries all in good health. Also, when it comes to life, a few other things. You will sleep much better. This is because you'll probably just be a little more physically active, so you'll be tired at night. But at the same time, you'll also get more energy. This is kind of that mood boost we talked about earlier. I'm not sure on this last point I had, but I found that it may help improve sexual function. This could be kind of due to that blood flow thing we were talking about earlier, how cardio just in general helps to improve blood flow through your entire body. This, I would wager on the bet, is probably likely why. But that's kind of why you should do cardio in a nutshell. This next section is going to talk about recovering from cardio and the best practices. Okay, so when we're talking about recovering from cardio, one of the first things you need to be doing is drinking plenty of water. So somebody who's a salty sweater might need more electrolytes. A good rule of thumb is about half your body weight in ounces of daily water as a baseline. So if you weigh 160 pounds, about 80 ounces of water as a baseline. But if you are exercising and doing a lot of sweaty cardiovascular work, you need to be taking in more water because of that as well. So drinking throughout your session, even a 1% body weight reduction in water by just in general throughout the day means you're dehydrated. So keeping up that water is super important. Also, the time of year, if you are in a place that's always hot out, you're going to be needing to drink more water versus where I am, where I'm filming this right now. It's winter outside, so just me going out in the world, I'm not going to be taking as much water because I don't need as much right now. During the summertime, I do increase my water intake because of that specifically. In addition to this, you might need to increase your carbohydrate intake a little bit. As we talked about earlier, carbohydrates, when broken down, are stored into muscle glycogen. This glycogen can be readily tapped in and used for fueling our different sources of cardiovascular activity, specifically more higher intensity forms of cardiovascular activity. I like to time these around my sessions if I was trying to be super intact. So something that's lower fiber and fat, having those around the session. So a great example of this would be like fruit or some bread that isn't whole grain, so kind of white bread. Just something that has very little fiber, very little fat, maybe moderate protein, that's okay. But basically carbs around it, in addition to just eating more carbs in general. And this is if you're doing a lot of cardio. If you're just going out for a walk every day, 30 minutes say, you probably don't need to be pushing this. But if you're doing more higher intensity activities specifically, yes, you should be increasing your carbohydrate intake very slightly. Around 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Protein helps with regeneration of all the different tissues of our body, regardless if you're doing cardio or not, so you need to be getting that protein in. And then afterwards, make sure to add some light activity outside of your cardio. So if you're doing something more intense like running, definitely some walking. You could even do stretching, etc. Just some light physical activity where you're not sitting and doing nothing is going to be super crucial. Okay, now we can talk about some different cardio myths and some frequently asked questions that I get when it comes to cardio. We're going to rip through this list super quickly. So if you do have any more questions on this one, again, please comment below and let me know. But the first one we're going to talk about, caffeine as a performance enhancer. Does caffeine help with cardio? Yes, a lot of the basically literature on this is that, especially in endurance-based activities, caffeine can have an improvement on your overall cardiovascular work output. So if you're trying to maximize it, maybe have a little bit of caffeine before your workouts. There's a huge general rule of thumb of 3 to 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. This can, for me, be from about 200 milligrams of caffeine all the way up to like 500 to 700. So it's a huge range. Find what works for you and stick with that. The next myth or frequently asked question is there a certain type of cardio that is the best to burn fat? No. Again, some will burn a little more calories. So technically those may be. So something like running, rowing, if you're bad at a form of physical activity, you're going to be burning more calories. But there isn't one inherently that's going to do that better. It just might burn calories a little bit more efficiently, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much a wash. If you're finding something that's consistent and that you enjoy, that's going to be the main thing, because that's what's going to lead towards long-term weight loss. In addition to this, we can also talk about cardio being the best way to lose weight. This is something that people always ask me, is like, which cardio should I do because I want to lose weight? So they're asking this question or statement because they assume that cardio is the best way to lose fat. This is sort of true. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, you will burn some calories directly from that cardio session, but at the same time, after that session, you're not burning any calories. And this is why weight training is super crucial, and we'll talk about later in the podcast, because weight training will build muscle, which actually burns calories at rest. So you can do some cardio during your session, they'll burn calories during, and then also that weight training where you build muscle, that's going to burn calories when you're sitting and doing nothing. So they're both helpful tools. Please do them both. Walking is enough cardio for me. This is something that people always say to me, is like, oh, I get my cardio from walking at the grocery store. As we've talked about numerous times, you need to hit a certain threshold of actual heart rate capacity. So if you're not even at least at 50% of your maximum heart rate, which, as we discussed earlier, 220 minus your age, you're not getting cardiovascular benefits. You are getting physical activity benefits, general movement quality, but that doesn't really count as cardio, as in improving your overall heart health. It's got to hit over that threshold, ideally at least 50 to 60%, maybe a little bit more, hopefully, if you're able to, which most people should be striving to. A next common myth and question I get is HIIT is better than steady state. So when we talk about fat loss, it's kind of a wash. Again, overall calorie burn, you're going to probably burn about the same calories in the long term. So if you do 30 minutes of kind of a lighter activity or 10 minutes of a really hard activity, in the end, you cut down the intensity of one and increase the duration of others. You're still going to be burning roughly about the same amount of calories. When it comes to health, I think you should do both. We talked about high intensity stuff. It's going to work that maximal heart rate, so a very vigorous activity for you. But also, in addition to this, that steady state is good for just general stamina and endurance through all your activities of daily life. So HIIT isn't necessarily better than steady state. You should incorporate them both. Should you run before or after your weights? This is another question I get asked a lot. Ultimately, the biggest thing I tell people is it depends on your goals. If you are able to do them on separate days, feel free. But if you can't, just do whatever's more important for you or whatever one you like more. So if it's more important for you to run, or if running is a higher priority in your life, I would run first. If you want to do better with weight training, I would weight train first. Myself personally, I usually weight train first because I don't notice as much interference with cardio, versus if I do cardio first, it kind of sometimes affects my weights. It's really not that big of a deal at the end of the day. Do what's good for you and what makes you stick to exercise. Last thing, running is bad for your joints. Running is bad for you, period. Running could be bad for your joints if you go in with too much volume and poor technique. As we mentioned, it is a high impact activity, and if you are running consistently in a poor movement pattern and you ultimately haven't gotten taught how to run properly, yes, this could absolutely be bad for your joints. And this is why I would really wean into your overall volume, wean into how much you're doing, and then of course over time, long term, you can come back and add more. So it could be, but it also couldn't be. So that ends the discussion on cardio. We're going to talk now about weight training and all the different benefits and ins and outs. So let's talk about weight training next. And specifically, we're going to talk about resistance training and what the difference between weight training and resistance training is, kind of as a general opening to this discussion. So weight training in itself is a form of resistance training. Resistance training is basically a variety of different ways to put external force on your muscles, bones, and joints to hopefully elicit a stimulus to help them get stronger over time. We can use weights, as in free weights, dumbbells, all these different things to help us do this, but we don't need to use weights for resistance training. I can, let's say for example, push against my hands really hard. I'm providing force and resistance against this, which is ultimately challenging my muscles, maybe not to the point where it's going to elicit a response and stimulus, but if you're really, really weak, it could. So weight training versus resistance training, this goes way beyond building bigger muscles. There's a huge neurological component to this. There's also an aesthetic component. And there's also just a strength component. So basically, this isn't just somebody who's going to be a bodybuilder when we're talking about lifting weights. This is longevity. This is being healthy. All these different things go into the whole purpose of weight training. So that's kind of the general introduction on it. It's not really too complex. Just think about resistance training in general is any type of external force placed upon a muscle or a specific body part that forces you to push it in another way. So this can be done through a lot of different ways, as we'll discuss in just a second in the next section, but that's the intro to resistance. Okay, so the different types of resistance training we can look at is a wide variety, right? There's a lot of different ways you can skin a cat when it comes to resistance training, and we're also going to talk about which might be best for you and talk about some intensities and training zones that also could be the best for you. So how hard do you need to work for yourself? When it comes to the different types of resistance training, we have body weight training. This is something like doing air squats. Maybe somebody's going to do some push-ups, maybe pull-ups too, right? You're using your body weight as kind of that external force against what you are doing. So we talked about resistance training previously. You need to be forcing either a body part or stimulus on your body to hopefully elicit a overall training response long term where you recover and get stronger. Body weight's one way you can do that. You can also do it with resistance bands. This is another very cheap way to do it. So those stretchy bands, people, you can see them, you can like place them on the ground, do curls with them and stuff. Those are a form of resistance training because you're applying resistance through that stretchy band that actually makes it tougher and more challenging on your body. In addition to this, free weights, probably one of the most commonly used things aside from machines. This can be something like dumbbells, a barbell, a kettlebell, all these different things. They're called free weights because they're free in space. They're not fixed in a specific motion. For example, I could take a light kettlebell right now and I could throw it across the room. It's a free weight. It's literally free in space. It's literally just a weight. Honestly, it's a glorified paperweight. That's how you could think of a free weight. But those free weights, we can grab them and have them place load on our body, which of course is going to challenge it to hopefully elicit that stimulus and recover to get stronger. In addition to this, probably one of the most popular things that people do is working the machines. This is good for targeting specific muscles usually, but also good for beginners. If you've never worked out before, using some machines can make it a lot easier for yourself, but these are, again, just ways we're providing stimulus to our muscles. Isometric, this is something like a hold where you're just pushing and holding against something as hard as you can. This is actually what I did earlier when I was pressing like this. That's an isometric hold. That's still technically resistance, right? That's resistance training. I'm providing resistance with one hand against the other, and those two together are almost resisting in itself. So isometric holds, a plank would be another good representation of that. In addition to this, we can also use cable machines. This is kind of similar to resistance bands, but the tension is going to be a little different. And then also pneumatic resistance. This is something I've played with a little bit, and I don't know how to describe this, but basically you're using the air pressure, and it's a very weird type of resistance training. Just know if you ever get a chance to do pneumatic resistance training, it's very different, and please do. So that kind of leads us into this next question about intensity and how hard should you work and how hard are we working? And this is going to look very similar to the discussion on cardio that we talked about earlier in the podcast, and there's going to be varying levels based off of how hard you can do. And you'll probably notice that just like cardio, the higher in intensity you get, the less you can do. Cardio, if I was doing something that was super hard, near my 90% of my maximum heart rate, I can only do that for maybe 10 to 30 seconds. But if I'm doing something more endurance based on the lighter side, I can do it much longer. This is the same case when it comes to resistance training, but it's based off of your 1 rep max of certain activities. So we're just going to use squatting, for example. Say you squat 200 pounds, that's going to be your 1 rep max. So if you're trying to develop pure strength, as in get stronger at that movement, you're going to do about 85-ish% of that. You could go kind of into 80, but 85 plus is going to help to develop more strength in that. Your actual strength rep range is going to be 1 to 5 repetitions. Once you hit over 5, you're leading more into kind of hypertrophy or muscle growth. So you're kind of leading less from the strength gains. And I will say too, these are all on a continuum. So you're not going to say you cut off at 5 reps. You're not going to get 0 strength gain and only muscle gain, etc. There's a lot of crossover symmetry, but no, if you do want to improve your overall strength, you're going to need to be lifting heavy, and you're going to need to be lifting heavier in those lower rep ranges. In addition to this, at 50 to 80% of our 1 rep max, say the squat for example, that's going to be kind of your muscular growth, as in hypertrophy. This is a huge rep range, could be 5 to 30 repetitions, so it's pretty impossible to mess up, I should say. You just get something in there, get some good work at that specific level. And this is where I would, I'm not going to say spend all your training, but if you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, spend a lot of it in hypertrophy because it'll help a little bit with strength, a little bit in endurance, a little bit with muscle size. If you're going for overall longevity in life, that's kind of where I would steer you towards. And then 30 plus rep range, it's going to be more endurance focused. So if I do a bodyweight squat for 30 times, or say a barbell squat for 30 times, that's going to be testing my local muscular endurance in my legs, in my glutes, in my hamstrings, all those different areas. So then you're probably asking yourself, which is the best for me? And just like cardio, it's going to really depend on your goals. If you're somebody who notices that you're really, really weak and you can't do, say, get out of a chair very easily, you're going to need to really try to improve your strength. So finding ways to build some volume, work that overall just ability to do it more than once. You might be somebody who you're like, man, I just love doing air squats for days, or I love doing pull-ups for days. You're going to be doing more of an endurance-based programming. So maybe even focusing more on those body weight forms of exercise. It's really going to depend on what you do. As I mentioned with cardio, though, this is a reoccurring theme with exercise. Why not both? You don't have to just do one. Why not both? Try to do all of them. That's going to give you the most well-rounded overall health and longevity perspective on it. But also, too, you got to look at what's your access to equipment, what do you have available, what are you comfortable with, and then try your best to work all of those into your daily program. But let's dig a little bit deeper on if you really need to do resistance training, and I think you'll see very shortly after all the benefits we can get from it that you 100% should be doing resistance training if you want to live the healthiest, most fulfilling life for yourself. So let's talk about some benefits. So improved glucose control. This is something that I think is really, really neat. So when you actually build some muscle, your muscle becomes almost like a sponge for glucose or energy. So if there's any free floating blood sugar in your bloodstream, when you get stronger muscles, it literally sucks it up to use as energy for those different activities. So if you're somebody with diabetes, making sure you're implementing some weight training is a huge idea. Greater strength of the entire body. Of course, if you challenge your overall muscles with resistance training, you're going to be able to just have a stronger body. Who doesn't want to be stronger, right? I like being stronger to do all the activities of my daily life, and I'm sure you do too. So that's a great way to improve your body through resistance training, and ultimately why you should do resistance training. In addition to this, improved quality of life. This kind of goes hand in hand, but who is better off in life? Somebody who is strong and can move and be agile when they're going out to the grocery store or they're going on vacation, they're helping their friend move. Who's better off? Somebody who's stronger or somebody who's weaker? Duh, somebody who's stronger. It's going to improve all aspects of your quality of life tremendously. Bone mineral density improvement. If you're somebody who's at high risk for osteoporosis, specifically older adults who are women, resistance training is one of the best tools you can do this by putting stress on your bone. Again, not too much. We want to work within our own level, of course. So this is where you'd have to work with a practitioner or a fitness professional when you're first getting started. But placing any type of additional stress on your bones is what's going to help to build it and improve that bone mineral density. There's also a little bit of cardiovascular benefit. Obviously not nearly as much as if you went out for a run or jog, etc. But when you get done from a set of let's just say bicep curls, or we'll go back to squats. We were talking about squats earlier. You do a set of squats, you're going to be out of breath. You're going to be out of breath mainly because there is some anaerobic capacity built this, and to recover anaerobically, you need to have a good aerobic base. So ultimately, long story short, you're going to be working your cardio a little bit. So there is some cardiovascular benefit. In addition to that, you burn more calories at rest. This is something that I talked about earlier when I was looking at cardiovascular work, and specifically the myths section. If you didn't check that section, go back out and listen to some of the myths and frequently asked questions about cardiovascular work. But anyway, you burn more calories at rest, and you're like, how do you do this? Well, when you actually build muscle, your muscle is extremely metabolically active. It burns lots of calories at rest. So although lifting weights won't burn calories when you're doing it, the byproduct of lifting weights long-term will. So something crucial and important to note if you're trying to reduce the chances of obesity for yourself, improve your body composition, of course, but also just burning more calories at rest so you can eat more. Who doesn't want to eat more? This will also, to some degree, reduce the risk of injury. I'm not going to say completely eliminate, because you can't completely eliminate any injury from happening entirely, but if you are stronger, you're able to tolerate different positions and bending and this and that, you're going to be at a decreased risk of injuring yourself during a variety of activities. This is something that's super prevalent, and we'll talk about in the myths section in a second. But people will always pick something up off the ground, they'll help their friend move something, and they hurt their back or they hurt their knee, and they'll blame the movement on it. I can't squat, I can't deadlift, I can't do all these things because they hurt my back. It's usually because they're not strong enough. They haven't built up their basically tolerance for their body, so that's kind of why they got injured. They weren't strong enough, and they increased their acute workload very, very drastically. So super important to reduce the risk of injury. Speaking as reducing the risk of injury as well, we can also look at some recovery tools of specifically for weight training, which is going to be this next. All right, so when looking at some different ways to actually recover from weight training, of course, one of the first things that we're going to talk about is protein. Protein usually recommended about 1 gram per pound of body weight. It's, I would say, more closely to 0.82 grams, but eating more protein, there isn't really going to be any detriments to it. So if you can get a little bit more, that's great. Also, protein's typically a little bit more of like kind of a healthier source of food. So when you're talking about somebody who's eating a lot of calories to help fuel their weight training, if you're eating more protein, the chances that you're going to be eating processed foods is going to be less likely. So that's another great reason to eat some more protein. You might need to increase your overall calories very slightly if you are at an okay weight. If you are obese, do not increase your calories. Please keep them at maintenance. Ideally, you're going to actually take off some calories so from your daily intake to hopefully allow you to lose some weight. But if you are at a healthy weight, being in a maintenance or even a very tiny surplus, so 200 to 300 calories above your maintenance level, eating that every day will be a great way to help you recover from your overall weight training. Basically because you have more raw materials, more calories, more food to help you recover. In addition to this, please do some light activity like walking, some light biking, maybe even stretching. None of those are inherently better than the other, but the fact that you do some activity outside of your resistance training is really going to help in overall recovery of it. Some people might we're thinking like cold and heat and all these different things. Heat can help a little bit with recovery, so like a sauna. I probably wouldn't do it beforehand. Likely after would be a little bit better, so you don't get too dehydrated. If you are doing stuff like that, making sure you're getting enough water, super crucial and important. Cold, this is one thing that has some contention. So if you're trying to improve your overall ability to perform on that day, doing like a cold bath or something might actually be good because it'll decrease inflammation. But inflammation in itself is actually a good thing and what helps to lead to building your muscles stronger long term. So if you're giving yourself a cold bath, you will decrease that inflammation to recover better immediately, but not necessarily long term. And that's a very crucial part. So kind of another aspect of that recovery. Sleep is so crucial. This helps with recovering all the different tissues and demands you put on your body throughout the day. But also on top of that, you just worked out, you just resistance trained. So make sure you're getting your sleep. I usually tell people 8 to 9 hours in bed. Not 8 to 9 hours of sleep, 8 to 9 hours in bed, because usually you'll get about an hour less of sleep from that, because you're going to be tossing and turning. You might need to go to the bathroom during the night. All these different things can lead up to that. Let's talk about a supplement, creatine monohydrate. So creatine monohydrate is one of the best research supplements on this, and we talked about in the cardiovascular section how creatine phosphate, specifically in the phosphogenic pathway for cardiovascular work, which is that very hard, intense, about 10 seconds of work, that is actually used a lot during weight training. So we can actually supplement this through creatine monohydrate. That's the one I would recommend. There's creatine phosphate, creatine diester, a bunch of different ones. Monohydrate's the most well-researched, most well-tolerated. It's the cheapest. It's the best one if you do want to get something that can help you. This isn't going to skyrocket your gains, but it does have noticeable effects on improving overall muscle mass and strength, and specifically power as well. That's going to help with that as well. But the big thing about this is that it brings a lot of water to your muscles, and it also replenishes the creatine in the muscles. But since it's sucking in a lot of that water, you need to be even getting harder on that water intake that we talked about. Water is important for cardiovascular work, but also if you're taking in creatine too, in just general, keeping your muscle cells hydrated. So your muscles, as I just mentioned, are very largely water. And if you don't keep them well hydrated, that's going to lead to an increased chance of tears when you're doing different things. So keeping that water intake very high. When you're talking about recovery, ideally 48 hours for a muscle to fully go through its protein synthesis cycle, and you would then hit it again. But with that said, if you are doing a low enough volume and intensity, you could probably hit a muscle every single day. If it's sore, you can still hit it every day, but ideally 48 hours after you did a muscle is a good time to hit it again. 72 hours, okay, but that 48 hours, 2-day sweet spot is going to be the best. So that kind of gives you just some general recovery tools for weight training. But this next section is going to be probably one of the more important ones that people like, is just some frequently asked questions or some myths regarding weight training. So let's jump in. All right, so let's address some weight training, resistance training myths and frequently asked questions. The first question that I get asked a lot is, it will get you bulky, or will resistance training get you bulky? No, if you are doing a level that is within a normal means, and most people who are just lifting for life and just feeling better, you will not get bulky by any means, especially if you're a woman. This is usually asked from women. You will not get bulky, especially usually where you build strength and muscle. Usually it's a lot in legs and your butt area. So don't worry about getting bulky. Also, for perspective, think about this. If you think about how easy it, quote unquote, would be for you to get bulky. Think about all the dudes right now who would be lifting weights. They would be huge. They would be bulky, but they're not, because it doesn't happen that quickly. And a lot of times it just improves your body composition, makes you look better in general. The next myth we're going to talk about is lifting is dangerous. Resistance training is dangerous, and this is completely false. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, usually it becomes dangerous when people are lifting loads or doing movements they're unfamiliar with. If you've never back squatted before and you load on 300 pounds, yeah, that's going to be dangerous. It's a heavy load for you that you've never done, and it's also movement you've never done. So that does become dangerous, but inherently if you're doing a really controlled bicep curls, for example, that you control the movement, it's well within your range, nothing dangerous at all. Actually, in fact, you could argue it might be even more dangerous to neglect doing that weight training, from the fact that your muscles are going to become weaker, your joint tissue is going to become weaker, all these different things are going to become weaker. Lifting is not dangerous as long as it's in your means, volume, and overall understanding of the exercise. Another question I might get asked from runners is, will it make you slower? It could, to some degree. If you're building more muscle mass, of course, you might be gaining a little bit of weight. So yes, literally you might have more mass. But also too, If you have more muscle mass, it's going to take more oxygen when you're breathing it in. We talked about cardiovascular system earlier. You take in oxygen, it goes in through the lungs bring it into the bloodstream, and that brings it to the tissues. Your muscle tissues are one of those tissues it brings it to. So if you have more active muscle, even if it's not like a muscle that directly affects running, it's going to suck up some of that oxygen, which is going to make it a little bit tougher for you to run. So it could a little bit, but with that said, if you are thinking about getting into weightlifting and running, again, we just talked about you're not going to get super bulky from it. Just adding a little bit of resistance training for injury prevention, injury risk reduction, I should say, and improved performance for your running is extremely advantageous, as long as you're not getting a bunch of weight, which you likely wouldn't because you're probably running a lot and monitoring your calories well. Another question I get asked is how long should your sessions be? When it comes to strength training, you could probably bang out your session in about 30 to 45 minutes. And this is usually based off the fact that most people are going to be lifting 3 to 4 times a week. And to get every major muscle group, which is what I'd recommend, doing full body 3 to 4 times a week if you're just doing it for longevity, you can get that done in about 30 minutes if you're pressed. 45 minutes would be a little bit better, probably more enjoyable, not as difficult for you. But yeah, both of those would be pretty good. You can do it longer. There's people who weight train for a living and they might lift 2 to 3 hours a day. But for most people in general public, 30 to 44 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, woo, is probably good for you. Also, cardio will ruin my weightlifting progress. We just talked about this earlier. It might have a very slight decrement if you're doing them in the same session. If you're doing them on the opposite sessions, there's almost no issues at all with overall resistance training or muscular growth. But this goes back to your goals. Are you somebody who's trying to max out your overall strength potential? Probably not a good idea to run and train for a marathon at the same time, right? If you're working at a reasonable level, it's not really going to affect it. But if you're trying to maximize one part of strength, one part of muscular size, it's going to have to give at some point. Another thing that I thought when I was younger is you need protein powder to build muscle. This is not the case. Protein powder isn't something magical. It is literally just protein that has been basically, so whey protein is usually what protein's powder made of. That's a byproduct of dairy and cheese and basically dairy products. It's then converted, processed into a powder form, usually added some chocolate flavoring or vanilla flavoring, some good flavoring to make it taste better. And then after that, basically, it's just protein. It's no different from getting chicken breasts. It's no different from getting eggs. It's the same dang thing. So you don't need protein powder. You do need protein, and if protein powder is a good source of that for you, then by all means, but you don't need protein powder specifically. There's nothing magical about it that will help you compared to eating just regular food. In fact, if you're able to eat just regular food, I would do that. Protein powder does taste good though. I like it. Another myth I always get is that I'm going to do core exercises or I'm going to do arm exercises to burn fat around that area. That is completely false. You cannot do that. There's no such thing as spot reducing. I will say there's a very, very, very small spot reducing fat thing that can happen, but it's going to be so negligible that you won't even, it's not even worth your time. The way you lose fat is by losing weight over time throughout your entire body through a calorie deficit, which we've talked about. Cardio can help with this. Weight training can help with this. It can all help. You can't spot reduce fat doing a specific exercise. Next question, should I do cardio before or after my weights? And I wanted to re-put this in just for anyone who's listening to this certain section and not the section on cardio. Should you do cardio before or after your weights, or should you do weights before, vice versa, whatever? I usually tell people depends on their goals. It doesn't really matter that much in the long term. So strength training, if you're trying to get stronger and improve your muscle mass, I would do that first. If you're trying to improve your overall cardiovascular work through cardiovascular exercise, I'd do that first. Just go off your priorities, make it easy. Two last ones. These myths are, this is one of the worst things I hate, and this really grinds my gears. When people say squats are bad for your knees, deadlifts are bad for your back. We talked about this earlier. The specific movements aren't what's bad. What's bad is that people usually do the movements after never doing a similar movement, so they've never deadlifted before, and then they also decide to try to max out their first day. One, you're increasing the overall load on your tissues that has never been challenged before. And two, you're just not familiar with the movement. If you're proficient in a movement and you are strong enough for that load at your current capabilities, there's no exercise that's inherently more dangerous than literally sitting and doing nothing, right? So please, everyone, quit telling people to be careful when you lift weights. Yes, we're going to be careful, but this is no different from telling somebody to be careful when you sit down, right? You're doing a movement. So this last section is what we were leading up to: cardio versus resistance training. Which one is better for you? We're going to go through all the different aspects of here, and I'll give you my yes or no question, my yes or no answer for this, and we'll go it. So fat loss. Which is better, cardio or weights? As I discussed earlier, cardio will help you to burn calories during your immediate session, but weight training in itself will help you to burn muscle so you can burn calories at rest. So you tell me, one's going to help you to burn more calories immediately, but long term, you want to build some muscle as well so you can burn more calories at rest and be more efficient. They're both important. I would say if I had to pick one, I would probably do resistance training focused on a kind of circuit style. So I'm getting a little bit of cardiovascular work and resistance training and building that muscle, but it's really hard. Please just do both. Which is better for strength, cardio or weights? This should be easy. Obviously, you're not going to build much bicep strength in your body or leg strength for squatting by running. So, of course, resistance training will help that. With that said, though, you do build some connective tissue strength with different forms of cardiovascular work, like running helps to build some of your connective tissue, tendons, and ligament strength in your knees, hips, ankles. But general strength is going to be more towards resistance training. What about general health? Well, you need to be doing both, people. If you want to be strong, if you want to live pain-free, that's going to help with resistance training. If you want to have a healthy heart, that helps with blood sugar management, overall fatty deposit management, so running your lipids well in your body. You're going to be needing to do some cardio. Please do both of them for general health. It's going to be the most crucial. In addition to that, we can look at brain health. We actually talked about earlier which is better for brain health. I will say there isn't much research on brain health for resistance training, so because of that, we kind of have to give the upper edge to aerobic training. So if you're talking about memory, how you think, aerobic training or cardiovascular training is probably going to be better, but there isn't much data right now on strength training. So strength training probably would help your brain health a little bit, but cardiovascular may be a little bit more. Body health. So in body health, I mean like physical, like your wrists, your joints, connective tissue, which one's better? This, again, we talked about earlier. Likely strength training is going to be a little bit better for kind of your musculoskeletal stuff. So keeping your muscles healthy, obviously, right? Healthy and fit. Keeping your joints healthy and fit. Keeping your bones healthy and fit. But with that said, if you're doing something high impact like running or jump roping or even fast walking, you can get a little bit of bodily, quote unquote, connective tissue health improvements through cardio as well. Endurance training. This should be a no-brainer, hopefully at this point in the podcast. If you're trying to improve the overall ability for you to do long endurance activities, walking a really long distance, running long distance, jogging, specific cardiovascular activity for those exact things going to be crucial. I wanted to end the podcast talking about the ACSM current guidelines for physical health standards. And this is both cardio and weights. We didn't talk about flexibility. I think that's important, but there isn't a lot of research on overall longevity and if you do flexibility stuff, how much it will improve your overall cardiovascular health. It definitely helps with how good you feel. With that said though, for cardio, the ACSM or American College of Sports Medicine recommends 150 minutes of moderate physical activity per week. This could be something like a brisk walk. If you're doing jogging, it's actually only 75 minutes of vigorous activity. So if you do something a little bit harder, cardiovascular wise, you can do less of it. But for the most part, breaking up 35-minute sessions of a brisk walk or a light bike ride 5 times a week is going to give you your cardiovascular benefits for health. This is for health and longevity, not weight loss, not overall maxing out how good your mile time is, for health. Also for health, you need to resistance train, as in lifting weights, using resistance bands, different types of resistance, twice a week for every single major muscle group. So that basically means going in 2 times a week, doing some squats, doing some bench press, some pulling exercises like pull downs or pull-ups. That's going to hit all your major muscle groups and get you good bone health, musculoskeletal health, and overall body health. So those are the guidelines. That's what you need, at least currently now, to be healthy. I'd highly recommend more. Hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for a little bit. Again, comment down below if you have any questions on all this. Please subscribe to our channel for more full podcasts and just discussions on health in general. And I'll go ahead and link a few more videos right here that I think you would enjoy as well. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you.